Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Andy Parker, the UX coach, and this is where I share people's stories of career success and failure from across the tech industry. Today I'm talking to Elizabeth Chesters. Born in Wigan, UK, Elizabeth now resides in Munich, Germany. We first met in 2015 when we were both presenting at a conference encouraging first-time public speakers. Since then, she has worked in-house for several organisations, both in the UK and Germany. I wanted to hear firsthand what it's like to move to another country for work when you don't know the language, the environment that you're going to be in, and the personal and professional cultures. What I learnt from talking to Elizabeth was that you don't necessarily need to move to an entirely different country to experience culture clashes and discrimination because of where you are from. I've left this interview fairly open and unedited, and I hope you come away from it with more questions than answers and are energized to do some self-discovery of your own. Here we go. What have you been doing today, and how did you get to today?
Okay, so starting with your first question about me. So I'm originally from Manchester, although people argue it's not Manchester because it's actually Wigan in the north of England. And it's such a strong accent that I have to actively try and get rid of with every word that I speak. So yeah, I lived there until I finished university. Then after studying computer science, then I moved to London. I was there for 5 years, and now after studying my master's and finishing there, I moved to Berlin. Actually, I was so scared of my lack of German, and then within Berlin, I was like, no, I want Munich. So yeah, just over a year and a half. I've been in Munich already. It's bizarre.
And since graduating and going into the work world, what are the types of job roles that you've taken on?
Ooh. So I started out as a developer. I was a back-end developer as well. I even did computer programming in college in my A-level. So I was already doing Java then. And I really thought I was going to be a Java Swing developer, which was like the back end to the front end, which was also front end, but it felt back end just because it was Java. And then I did a sandwich course. So you take a year out to do a year of work experience in a company, but you're still supported by university. I was a Java developer there. And when I then graduated, in my last year of computer science, I finally came across human-computer interaction. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I was getting a lot of like mental blocks with development. It was really overwhelming. I was with somebody at the time who was just incredible at it. And it was very difficult to not compare myself to that. But what he could do with programming is what I feel like I can do when I look at an interface. I just didn't really know what it was. I was doing usability engineering as a developer. But then it all came to place. And I think also with the maturity of UX, it wasn't quite there either, because now you're talking 2014, I graduated. We didn't even have a designer. It was all done by business analysts. And it took me a long time to get into design. That was an absolute struggle for about 2 years. So my first job was consulting. So you could do a little bit in a lot of topics. You could move on to projects. The entire point was to make yourself a brand. That was the work ethic. You're speaking at conferences, doing blog posts. So you could go into a project either as a developer or no matter what your skills were, as long as it was necessary in the project. So I started to move into becoming a UX. And then I wanted to move to London and found the first job, which was being a developer, but again, building like telephony menus, which was so annoying to do. And then I finally got my big break thanks to Designer Hangout, actually.
Tell us more about that. So Designer Hangout is very much, it's the cool place where we hang out, and it's been around for a little bit longer than that. If I remember rightly, it was about beginning of 2013 that this young guy in America went, hey, there's this thing Slack, and I'm going to use it to make it so that it's possible for people all over the world to chat to each other if they want to. But it's actually helped you in finding work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually had 2 jobs found through there. So my first job was with a company in London, again, as an agency. So I was used to that with consulting sort of vibe. But yeah, I was on that since being a developer. I think I found it on Twitter. It's just like this giant Slack room with, I think, maybe like 20, 30,000 people, if not more now.
Mm.
I've also met a designer in India. We did guerrilla testing just for fun when I went over to help a friend with something. And then, yeah, my last job in London was also through there.
That's amazing. It's quite incredible to see something like that still going. It's gone through many different guises and tried to do various different things with it. But the fact that it's still there, and I see all the different channels for the different countries and everything as well, in particular, are always got some kind of conversation going on. Let's go back to this sort of transition, because you said something that I'm very interested to learn a little bit more about, which was that it was really hard to get that first job. Can you talk to us a bit more about that?
For those who don't know Java very well, it's a very low, well, not very low level, but it's a language, but it's a very back end language. And I think people had a lot of stereotypes on what a developer was, especially being back end development, also with Node and things like that. So I got the feedback in interviews like, you're too much like a developer, you're speaking too technical. Why would we want to put someone who's a developer who's usually lives in the attic or basement? Why would we put those people in front of our users? Like, we don't understand why you're here. And even though like I had done human-computer interaction as part of my degree, my computer science degree, they were just so like questionable. Like, why are you here? And a lot of people demand portfolios. So it was very difficult not having anything from industry to prove that I could actually do what I was saying. But what was good was I found London and a lot of volunteering options. I didn't want to just redesign Netflix again. You know, I've heard that advice so often, and I'm like, there are so many charities that you can work for, like volunteer basis, or get in touch with. So I was doing work for Empower Hack and Women Hack for Nonprofits and UX for Change, and even open source. Like, okay, you don't necessarily have to learn how to code. It definitely helps. But there are so many things out there where you don't have to redo Netflix for the 1,000th time based on absolutely no data when they have an incredible amount of data.
You're saying that not having a portfolio when going out for applications was a barrier, and your approach to addressing that barrier was to get involved in like social hacks and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so when I was choosing my degree, I was torn between computer science and I was doing a lot of photography at the time. Even to just become a photographer, you needed an art qualification, you needed a portfolio, you needed to have this, that, and the other. But for computer science, you didn't even really need a computing A level. It was just bizarre to stand there and essentially click and point a button, and there is more science behind it versus computer science, who a lot of people told me I would need maths and I would need physics, and we just didn't need any of that. So yeah, my approach had to be very just on it. I mean, I went through the stage of redesigning things that already existed but was getting nowhere, and then trying to really make a point of going out. I got given some amazing advice when I went to London. And it's like, even if you don't want to do something, to make the most of London, say yes to everything and really put yourself out there. And the first company I worked for really did give me a serious work ethic, where it was like, you are the brand, you have to eat, live, breathe, sleep, everything to do with like your passion. So it was about getting out there, meeting new people. I did also do meetups that were very dev focused at the time. And it was quite difficult to also move myself away from design. So I was like the co-founder of the first officially supported Code Academy meetup. So I was still teaching people how to code, and just met people through the grapevine and going through meetups and being like, okay, you have to take this seriously. And the feedback that you're getting, I've been in Germany for 3 years, so this is like 8 years ago already. So I'm not even sure like how I even met all of these people.
Just by hitting that networking grapevine, right? I found out about that conference that we met at, Talk UX, which I'd love to see more of that happen again. I know that there's some really good things that are out there now that are thinking a little bit more about who speaks at things. But the thing that I liked about it the most was the fact that it gave people an opportunity to practice presenting their thoughts and things that they've been exploring and playing around with that otherwise would never have got it. You know, you're not going to get on the UX London or Business to Buttons conference, but these kinds of things you are. And I wanted to see more of those. And they seem to be a lot less these days. Have you noticed similar kinds of things? Like what's that community networking vibe like in Munich?
I have a New Year's resolution this year to get back out there in Munich again, because I think since the pandemic, my stamina has just really decreased. And moving to somewhere where I don't know the language so well, it was quite difficult to put myself out of my comfort zone. Yes, I've made it here, but like staying here and make it my own. And, you know, every time you get into a situation where your German just wasn't good enough, it really is a downer. And sometimes you have to really push yourself, and you're not going to get any better if you don't push yourself. So next year, that's really what I want to do. But this year at the end, I was actually headhunted on LinkedIn for a school in Munich. So I've been teaching migrants and marginalized people in a school in Munich and how to get into UX and how to choose the path in which they want to join technology. So they have programming courses, they have UX courses. So I've been teaching those, and it was an amazing feeling to just be in a room of people, all designers who just understood what you were talking about. And they were all international. So it was a bit of English, a bit of Spanish, a bit of German. You get very humbled in those situations very quickly, and you realize you're not alone.
I find that accessibility as a space, so this is an area that you were very much looking at whilst you were a developer, and I can only assume, because you're a good-hearted person, that this has carried on into all of your design and creative thinking. It's very common for people to hear about accessibility and assume that that is basically, does it pass this mysterious invisible checkmark text on WCAG? And as I've moved further away from like product design and more into services and systems and organizations, it's been a little bit easier to expand beyond that concept, that actually you've got to think about the things that happen before and after hitting the product as well. Tell us about your journey with accessibility and the things that you're thinking about and what that means to you today in the context of being a UX designer.
The beginning of my journey, I was still a graduate developer, and I was tasked with I was given an internship, and the project entirely was make our company website accessible. So to be honest, I didn't really know what that meant. I was lucky in that I was supported by someone who actually has an impairment. So the project had stakeholders in Brazil, also in India. I was starting to understand that not only was it impairment differences, because I was working with a guy who was visually impaired, it was also cultural differences. So they were saying, you know, how some countries' attitudes towards impairments, they sometimes believe that it's your fault. So some people don't necessarily believe that it should be something that is fixed. And you're just like, what on earth? A country that believed in reincarnation, they think that it's your fault and that you've been reincarnated as someone with an impairment because of something that you've done in a past life. So already we're seeing like cultural attitudes really impact things like how companies and the people who make up a company really react to impairment. So that's where it all began. And even now, I'm the accessibility champion on my team and within the company. It was the same at previous jobs, and now especially in Germany, I can feel it firsthand. But in every single job, it's been diverse. I've had my accent mocked 1,000 times because they can't understand me. You know, Alexa mocks me all the time because she can't understand me. So again, it's I do now say like my focus is on inclusion, inclusive design, because I think that definitely that umbrella term makes it a lot easier to explain that it's not just accessibility, it's also cultural things like localization or even temporary situations. You could be holding a child, could be holding a dog, or you could have half an arm. It's the same situation. And you have to truly understand your users and what they're going through in order to design something that fits them.
Yeah, the visible, invisible as well is another one that I quite often come against. Language is a big part of that, obviously, particularly written language, and saying, well, dyslexia, the way that you typeset that, the line lengths, there's these subtle small things which you might not really notice but can make a huge bit difference. You also talked there about cultures, and that's a fascinating story of the idea of what you've been reincarnated as is due to a thing that you did in your past life. Just taking a little bit of a different spin here, what about like the work culture? I would actually argue, and maybe this is me being unbelievably southern here and probably really putting myself well out of the Happy Valley. I only say it because you commented on it, of people talking about your accent. That happens in England just as much as it will happen anywhere else in the world, right?
Oh, yeah.
Thinking about those challenges of navigating office culture and businesses, and then how that relates to where you physically are. Has there been a big shift from working in those London companies to working in German companies?
I was abused in every office, to be quite honest. Even the Manchester office, it was such an international team. I got mocked all the time for it, and you just have to take it on the chin, and really just weigh up the impact. Down south in London, it was the same story. They couldn't understand me, and it does get worse if I get angry or tired, because it takes a lot of self-awareness to understand, how fast you're speaking, what is the actual capabilities or understanding of the person that you're talking to when you've got a team of Italians and Polish and Germans and Portuguese people. It was just incredible. But at the same time, you have to be incredibly self-aware. The only difference I would say is that here I am meeting people who have never met a British person. And suddenly you're wearing the weight on your shoulders of representing an entire country, maybe even 4 countries if you look at the United Kingdom. And then when you say you're British, suddenly you speak on behalf of everybody, and they're like, you're hitting every stereotype that I had about British people. You're not really sure how to take that.
How does that affect you? So you're navigating an environment where it's not your native language. Inevitably, people are going to speak in their native tongue at certain points in the day, whether you're in an office or on a video call. That sounds like that's a lot to be burning through whilst trying to focus on ultimately the thing that you're employed to do.
Yes, I am very lucky that my work language is English, because we are such an international team. And since the pandemic, they've really broadened out who they hire. So we have team members in Sri Lanka and Portugal. And so our common language is English. But all of our C-level people are German, and they speak German, and they speak German among themselves. So it is quite hard to insert yourself sometimes into conversations or understand jokes, because again, culture is not just the language, it's the jokes, it's the inside jokes. When we have karaoke at the work parties, it's all the German 90s songs that they have at family dances that they would have experienced growing up. So they know all of the lyrics to 99 Luftballons, and we're just sat there listening and joining in with our little English. I'll tell you one thing that was exhausting, though. When I came to Germany the first time, I was about 16 for the Christmas markets, actually in Munich. And they offered me a bread roll, or I call it a bread balm. And they asked me, do I want Semmel? And I thought it was the mustard on the sandwich, and it wasn't. It was the Bavarian word for Semmel. So I was on the hunt for about 15 years for a sauce called Semmel, and it turns out it was just the bread. And it's so painful, because now I live here, and now we have the Christmas markets, and I see that word everywhere.
Yeah, and now you get it. But that's localization, isn't it? And I think this is a really great, example of that, because that happens in design every day. I wonder whether you perhaps have an advantage or disadvantage with your colleagues, being that you work in English, but it's not necessarily their first language. So whilst you have a shared language that you're working in, do you still feel that there are times where you have to think about the way that you describe something? So like, you've given a great example there of a bread roll. No one south of Watford calls it a bum, but you totally would, and
Yes.
because that's a regional, it's localization to there. It's no different to like if you go, like, I didn't know what a Parmo was until someone took me to Newcastle, and now I know. Is that a challenge? Like, is that something that you have to be mindful of as an English worker working in a international company in Germany with people from all over the world, that you don't fall into an assumption that, like, well, we all speak English, this is my native language, and so therefore you all clearly are going to understand the way that I describe things or the conversations that we're having?
Yes, slang is also a big problem because I don't necessarily always... Okay, so a lot of colleagues will say that they've learnt British English. What they mean by that, what it feels like, is that it's just the spelling of British English, but they are not taught things like British slang. So you're trying to express yourself and you're using slang, and they're like, and you have to really think. And I remember having a Dutch colleague and I was like, what do you fancy for lunch? He's like, what do you mean fancy? What do you want to eat? I just, at the time, I just remember I could not for the life of me just explain what that meant without using another colloquialism. And I'm also facing this issue in German because our product is in German and in English. So right now my design team is little me, with my like B1 German, and my other designer who is Portuguese and lives in Portugal with very little desire, surprisingly, to learn German when she doesn't need it. So we're also hitting that issue. So we have to get all of our things translated. But we do have someone in marketing who does help with that, who can speak English and German. But again, when they're not designing, it's very difficult to understand the context of that word. So we still have those issues.
So that context, let's talk about that a little bit deeper. Context of words matters, but just like the approach to how you deliver that work, that organizational culture as well. I'm guessing that there's a lot of assumptions in that too, or things that you believe should be the way things operate, but perhaps they're slightly different in Germany. Maybe it's just that company. Like, have you worked for the same company the whole time that you've been in Germany, or different companies as well?
I've worked for 3 German companies so far, and it has depended. So my first company was German, but I think the interface was in English. And then in my last company, I was like managing all the research in German and French and English. And now we have the problem of like translations, but not just language. I noticed very recently we have a floppy disk icon when we tell users to save. It's like some really obscure banner, and when you think about culture, it also extends to things like generations. And we're getting like Gen X and millennials in interviews saying how they're teaching Gen Z how to use our product. So we know that Gen Z has entered the workforce. They haven't got a clue what a floppy disk is.
It's a curious evolution, isn't it? The interface iconography and things like that has been one that we've actually been talking about for quite a long time, being very aware that there is going to be this point in time where we have this legacy iconography. How do you approach things like iconography or language for actions and things like that in design when you're trying to cater for a multilingual, multinational market?
So the first step is just to research and test absolutely everything. And when I mentioned earlier that I'd gone to like India for the gorilla testing, I was discussing with the Indian guy, like, what should my approach be? Should I dress up in a kurta? Because I had them, and I can sort of get away with looking Indian. Do I try and blend in to be like one of them? Because similarity attraction theory suggests that you trust people who look like you, who look like they have your best interest in you because you feel like they understand you the most? Or do you take the approach of, I'm a dumb tourist, please teach me everything that you know, like please don't leave out any details, because if I mention something to you like Marks and Spencer's, you have assumptions about that, you have context about that brand, that British brand, their adverts, you've seen them on the TV, their slogans, everything about their vibe. But the moment that someone speaks to me about a company or a brand in somewhere else, I have no idea about that. And yes, that's something that you can go away and maybe look up, but to actually hear it from a user's point of view and understand if they have and share those same cultural expectations or feelings is also very valid. So at the moment, I have started, we are a very limited in maturity in a UX department within this company. We're the first two designers to be permanently employed. The other ones were freelancers. And research. We are very limited in our knowledge, but challenging ourselves and being at it completely open-minded and going out there to be like, really with the curious mindset, moderation approach. I will say, though, I do accept that there is a limitation because I don't speak well enough German. I'm trying to prepare myself to learn as much German as possible to reach a point where I can offer research in German and English, because the conversations, how people express themselves, to really understand German people, you have to understand the language. It was just how they use the product as well. They use things like German metaphors, and I just don't have that context. They have to explain it to me, and they have to explain it to me in English. And I have to go away to colleagues and be like, why is this? And this is what they do, and things like that. So, but recognizing that is definitely the first step, but I'd say it's not an easy or a quick one either. Been here like 3 years now, and it's just like, it's so frustrating to still be only at this level.
Yeah, I think we forget that kids don't just like drop out of someone and then speak perfect language. Did you go through the whole do the night classes and all of that kind of thing when you got there for learning basics?
I started learning German before I even got here, so I continued to go into the office when I moved November 2020. So leading up to then, I knew I was interviewing for places in Germany, and I had an amazing German colleague who went out and he helped me buy like German textbooks, and he also studied computational linguistics. So even though he was German, he knew like all of the terms, present continuous tense and the grammatical tenses. So he was an amazing person to learn from. And then when I moved into Berlin, and people tell you that you don't need that much German, but it's a lie, because everything is in German. Everything legal has to be in Germany because there can be mistranslations or misinterpretations. So I had an amazing German teacher. He actually was based in Finland, but from Hamburg. It's just unfortunately when I moved to Munich, everything just became so expensive that I discontinued. But my work has just paid for a learning course with the Goethe Institute come January. So still on the path.
Is there anything in particular that you would like to talk about or share? Is there something that's been on your mind that you think?
I think what we were talking about is the missing gap in progression.
Yeah.
So even though I'm going to all like the meetups and the talking at the conferences and like all the volunteering, it still felt like I was going into, there was no clear path on what was next. And like also moving to a different country when you don't have the language skills, the UX maturity here seems to be very limited. It almost felt like I stagnated.
That's interesting. Tell me more about that. So we've recently had Marvin Hassan on the show, who is a Berliner, and talked about terms of like things, something like head of UX or director of UX. These things which seem like quite high profile, lofty titles can often be given to people because they're the only person in the company that's doing that thing. One of his frustrations was not having other people in the organization with different experiences to you or longer periods of time doing something to you that you can develop and learn from, and having to go outside for that. What's your experience of that been like?
I would say very personal. I think right now in my company, I am the senior designer with a midweight designer. So by default, that makes me lead designer and the most experienced designer by default. That doesn't mean that I'm experienced in what I need to be experienced in. So I'm now going through the phase of understanding just how much knowledge my colleagues have of design. I'm trying to move design. I was hired to do pretty pictures, and it's been very clear that's what people expected from design. It's in the title, and it's somewhat understandable that that is the stereotype of what a designer does, and they needed someone to create features and spec them out and things like that for the developers. But it's been very easy to see that a company can so easily run around like headless chickens and be swamped with ideas and not understand, if they've not had a researcher on their team, how a design team can help fill in those gaps and that knowledge of users, and run things like a survey or a diary study to understand how people use it, why people use it. So I'm trying to move design as an entire department into a more strategic role to help product owners understand what data they have and complement that. And I believe there should always be not just collaboration, but like tension between product owners and designers to be like, hey, we need this on behalf of the users. And they say, well, the business needs this. And there has to be that middle ground. So I am now learning all of the language to help me move UX into a strategic place. And going back to like Designer Hangout, they've been an incredible wealth of knowledge. I especially want to talk about Eddie Rich and Tom Kerwin and Adrian Howard, who have answered stress calls when you're just like, oh my God, this situation has happened. What do I do? What language do I use? Even though it's English, the politics of C-level suites people and the emotions when you get to that level and the hoity-toity titles that you mentioned is completely different. And even when you're a native speaker, it's very difficult. And there are more pressures in that way, that you can't get away with the fact that you don't know the language. And there is no, this is not my first language excuse when you word something a little bit too directly or in ways that people don't yet quite understand.
You mean there's a combination of the tonality, the way that you speak,
Mm-hmm.
which being, from Manchester / Wigan is very direct.
Yes.
That is part of your culture, is you say it how it is.
Yes.
So you've got that then combined with, is this the way that we behave within the work environment in this country and then in this company?
Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest, not only do I come from Wigan, I come from a council estate in Wigan. So there is a way of talking. And it's that typical thing of you go into work and everyone takes the mick out of your accent. You sound common. I've worked alongside people who have gone to Eton College, and they have like the rings on their finger that's like a family, what's the word for it? Like signal, or like the shield, family shield, things like that. And I'm just sat there like, how on earth do I have the same job as you? But at the same time, like, I did feel attracted to Germany because they can be very direct in that way. And I really feel like when they give you feedback, they really mean it, because it's not passive aggressive. It's just straight up aggressive if they mean to be. And when they tell you that you've done a good job, they are not doing it because they feel like they need to. They just won't say anything. And that's very much the culture. But, you still have to understand how design fits in, and yourself as a colleague amongst other people. When your C-level person is being very excited about a feature, you have to play that game with them. There's a really good book called The Games That People Play. It's quite dated now and the language is like very old, but the principles are very much the same. And it's understanding that, I mean, there's a saying, misery loves company, but that's not true. Misery loves miserable company. No one wants to be in the worst of moods, being surrounded by someone who's in the best of moods, and vice versa. And it's the same, like you have to learn to be pragmatic, and people have praised me for being pragmatic on features and designing ways that can be delivered. But at the same time, you have to let people have those moments and know when to provide data, understand when this decision will actually be made, what user impact is that going to have, but therefore what business impact that is going to have. I have been told in the past that I'm too user focused, and I've always championed the user because I'm a designer. I'm a user experience designer. There was another talk that called sucks because if you don't have users in there or some user experience, it sucks, which is true. But at the end of the day, we're there as a business to make money, and what you do on behalf of your users translates into that business approach. So it's a whole new language, especially when you're talking to like head of sales or the co-founders, CPOs, COOs. It's different games that you play at different parts.
We started off with talking about the challenges of getting off the ground, being able to leave education and find the first role, and that you took jobs that fit your degree until you could find that opportunity to be able to move away from that. And something that we see a lot of, in particular right now, with the state of global economy and mass redundancies, is a lot of people career switching. When you have found that, and I think that the suggestions that you've provided there of basically get involved is still valid. Once you're here, and there are many, many people just like you who are the designer of one in a company, and you've said there's still these developmental gaps. We have these communities like Designer Hangout, which are free. It's a community in the truest sense because it's there and you are either part of it because you want to be or you're not. What else is missing? What are the things that you would like to see for yourself? But also, I challenge you to think about what would you like to be doing for other people?
I mean, this is why I teach, because I do want to be the change that I am begging for. I was promised a mentor so many times in companies when I was interviewing, and it just never happened. So I've done a lot of work to be the mentor and to share what knowledge I have. I mean, sitting here now, did I really have the right to be at Talk UX speaking about accessibility? I don't know, to be honest. I'm not impaired. And I don't have that first-hand experience, but I feel like that still gives me the platform to be an ally in that respect. In terms of developmental gaps, I think it would be nice to understand the tech scene in Munich. One of the weirdest things is that they do have a tech sauna event where you go and sit naked in events and talk about tech. That feels like a very German thing, which I don't know if I want to be discussing design naked. I don't know how else to word that. So maybe something with clothes on would be nice. Yeah, I don't know. I think, again, it's my bias right now from only being in Munich for a year and a half, and only just feeling confident enough to be going out and seeing what tech events there are, even in English or in German. I have like a support network around me, like the three guys I mentioned. So Designer Hangout is absolutely something that I've made the most of, shall we say, especially since being on a team of two. Even now, we're asking accessibility questions and inclusive questions like that. So I think it was as a mental blocker, to be honest. I think after the pandemic, we got so used to just sitting at home and not doing anything. And then when you're faced with, this is a room of designers again, look how exciting this is, and you can do this in Germany, I have to push myself. I don't think it's a lack of being around. It's because it's nerve-wracking when a language is so important for you to learn. Sometimes you stay in your comfort zone so that you don't fail. And then you know why you're failing because you're not trying. So I think it's very much a me problem at the moment. I have things around me is just taking a lot of advantage and going through what I did in London. it is frustrating. I had an amazing network in London and left it all. Now I have to do that all over again.
Is there an element of trust or having the confidence that if you walk into a small room full of people trying to look for free beer and crisps, to listen to some people from that town talk, that they're going to be the same good-hearted people that you would have met going and doing exactly the same thing in England?
No, I trust that there are nice people out there. They're all going through the same thing as me. I think it's just that stamina. I mean, when I also moved to Munich, I moved to like the edge of Munich. I now have a dog, which is one of my pride and joys. But now that he's like 2.5, he can be left alone. And I have to trust that that's going to be fine as well. When you have a little bit of anxiety, don't get a dog because you just get anxious about them. And I think this is a typical millennial thing. I was doing the meetups, I was doing the blog posts and the conferences, and I did my masters, and I did as I was advised and I was told in order to make it big in my career. And it's now you sat here and you're just like, still can't even afford a house. And we're all struggling to pay for things. This is not a unique issue, but you just get tired. And what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to keep going to the meetups and doing the conferences. When you reach that point in doing it 5 years, 6 years later, now what? What is that question? And now I'm trying to speak to people like on Designer Hangout, like what is next? I've proven that I can do the designs. Now, how do I change my strategy to really change my department? And this is why I chose the company I work for now, because of the size of that and the impact that I can have and the freedom that I have to really shape what design means within this company. So I think that is what's next for me. And that's something that I came to recently after an amazing conversation with my head of sales, who just really paved the way for what needs to be done for design here. And there is a lot of chaos at the moment. But funnily enough, one of the people I really look up to is Gordon Ramsay. And he, on a podcast recently, was saying, you have to face the shitstorm. You have to face the storm and understand what it looks like on the other side. And the best chefs in his kitchens were the ones who were quitting 4 hours when they were taking bets. And yes, it's chaotic at the moment. Is it the design processes that I would like? Are there issues coming up? Absolutely. But this is going to be one hell of a story for when I move on next. And I have to face the storm. So that's me right now.
That's a really beautiful way of looking at things. I want to check on that with you because I wholeheartedly agree. If you walk away from something just because it's hard, then you haven't given yourself a fair opportunity and a chance to understand what you're really capable of doing, or at what point you have gone too far. However, I think that when you put it into that wider understanding of that it requires energy, it's your energy, that there is a risk. Can you do that if you just don't give a shit about the thing? Do you actually do you need to believe in the mission, the purpose of the business, to be able to be that person that's weathering the storm?
So this is also a question that I'm asking. I've been told I have like the martyr complex where, it's understanding how I can help, but understanding if I am the right person to help and be the one pushing for certain changes. I've worked in teams where processes were in place and everything was hunky-dory and life was amazing. But, now is the question of how much do you teach other people that, and even then, just because it worked for that team doesn't mean that it's going to work right now. It's just that that way can work. You do have to set your own boundaries. For me, I do find that difficult. I'm not going to lie. If I was to quit the storm, it would be knowing that I tried and I tried X, Y, Z, and it didn't work because I maybe wasn't the right person, or I didn't have enough seniority, or I didn't have language skills to express myself in the way that I needed to. Or basically, you have to accept that you might not be able to change everything. You are not the company. You're not everybody else. And so where do you draw that line? Especially like the smaller the company. we're 13 years old, but we still call ourselves a startup. And sometimes they very much have those startup-y attitudes. Fail fast, do this, do that, see what happens, without really understanding the impact that that's going to have. So you have to pick your battles, understand the situation, and just know when enough is enough. And, if your health is being compromised, then that's when you definitely need to take a step back and be like, okay, I've tried this and this didn't work. Why?
There's plenty of times where we can say that our environment and the culture that we're in is negative, or that it's the organization's problem of how I've ended up in the situation that I'm in, whilst forgetting that we have complete control over what we do individually. And that might be true for you, that you look at that environment and you say that's a negative environment. It's a negative environment for you. You have the ability to be able to leave that environment and thrive and prosper somewhere else if you wish to do so. And you can sometimes change things within that environment because you think it's going to be better for others, for everyone, like these small changes. Otherwise, we wouldn't do what we do. That is the great joy of being a designer, isn't it?
And also, I've worked in enough companies now where I'm just like, yes, it's chaotic here, but it's going to be chaotic everywhere. It is. So it's just understanding this is the right battle right now and the next step. But that is, personal.
You have so much to offer people other than creating an account on Designer Hangout, if you can. Where else can people go to continue the conversation with you?
Probably on LinkedIn. I'm not so much on Twitter now since it got taken over. But yeah, I also have a website with a contact form as well. And I will be on Designer Hangout, all the time.
Thank you once again for listening to the show and to my guest, Elizabeth Chesters. There'll be more episodes soon, and as always, if you'd like to join me and share your experience, email me, andy@theuxcoach.com. Or you can now find me on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn.